Yeah, hey, what a great day, huh? What a great day. We're so glad that you are here. Happy Mother's Day, all you moms in all of our campuses. I also just want to welcome our campuses right now. We are one church in 4 different locations: Woodbury, Cottage Grove, Eagan, and Hastings. Welcome, welcome, welcome. We're in a series, and many of you know this already, we're in a series on quitting things. And the thing that we're going to talk about quitting today might just be the hardest thing that you'll ever have to try to quit doing. Because the truth about this thing that we're going to try to quit doing today is you've probably already done it today. Maybe you've already done it like many times today. We find doing this thing as natural as looking down at our smartphone, which some of you have already done like 10 times since I started. It's just the way we are. And the thing I'm talking about quitting today is this thing right here: complaining, arguing, whining, belly aching, moaning, all these things. Let's just be honest, friends, we do this, don't we? I mean, how many of you, let's just do a Crossroads survey across all 4 campuses right now. How many of you in the last 10 years you've complained about something? Just see your hands. 10 years. All right. How about the last 10 minutes? Let's not do that. Yeah. Mine's up. Yeah. Here's the truth about me, and probably the truth about you. We rise in the morning and we whine. That's what we do. We rise and whine. And I think sociologist Robert Hughes' book, The Culture of Complaint, that's the name of the book, sums up the culture that you and I live in. Ours is a culture of complaint. We somehow or another think that life owes us, or we somehow think that we are entitled to what everybody else on the planet has. And if we don't get what everybody else gets, what do? We grumble, we whine, we complain. And against this culture of complaint, we have the Apostle Paul, who is the prolific writer of the New Testament in our Bibles, who writes these words to a church he started in Philippi. He says, do everything, note that word by the way, do everything without complaining and arguing, so that no one can criticize you. Live clean, innocent lives as children of God, shining like bright lights in a world full of crooked and perverse people. Now, I don't know how you feel about that verse. I mean, the first sentence here, do everything without complaining and arguing. As I was reading that in my Bible, I was like, come on, Paul. Come on, how do you expect me, Paul, to do everything without complaining and arguing? I don't know about you. I want to file a complaint against that verse right there. Who do we do that with? I don't know. God, yeah, okay, I'm not going to rewrite the Bible, but I find that really, really hard to fathom, hard to swallow. If I were to rewrite the Bible, which I promise I never will, I would rewrite that verse to say, do everything with complaining and arguing. I can nail that. I'm all over that like stink on a skunk. Right? I mean, I can do that. But do everything, come on, this is really hard. And maybe you're thinking right now, like, okay, what's the big deal? Okay, so we complain a little bit. So we argue a little bit. So we whine a little bit. So we grumble a little bit. So we bellyache a little bit. It's the American way. It's part of our culture, right? So what's the big deal? It's kind of like, baseball and apple pie and Chevrolet, right? Well, no. Complaining is not in the category of baseball, apple pie, and Chevrolet. Complaining and grumbling should be put in the category of Ebola, the Zika virus, and AIDS. And if you think that's preacher exaggeration, it's not at all. Because complaining is very, very infectious. It's very, very dangerous. It infects us and it affects other people. And that's why today I want us, before we leave our campuses and go enjoy the rest of this beautiful Mother's Day, I want us to wave the big white flag today and just commit to saying, I quit. I quit complaining. I am going to do everything without complaining or arguing. There's so much here at stake. Not only does our complaining infect us and affect other people, it also affects our relationship with God. We're going to talk about this later on. But just so you know, when I complain, when I murmur, when I moan, when I groan, when I do all those things I do so well, it affects my relationship with God in a very, very serious way. So we're going to look at what complaining does. Before we say, I quit doing something, we've got to say, okay, what does it do to us? And what does it do to other people? And I can't think of a better story to look at than the ancient Israelites in the Old Testament, because they were crushed by their complaining. And I want to trace that and track that and show how that happens to me and how it happens to you and what we might be able to do to be able to walk out of our campuses today and saying, you know what, I'm going to live a different kind of life. I'm going to do what that Apostle Paul said. I'm going to shine brightly in this dark world of grumbling and complaining and murmuring and bickering and all that other stuff. So we're going to look at the story of God, God's people, and I need you to go ahead and grab a Bible right now and turn to the second book in the Bible, which is the book of Exodus. We're going to look at a ton of scripture today. Don't complain about it. All right, this is not a good day to say, well, that's a lot of verses. You're going too long. Whatever. No, we're not going to do that today. So go ahead and grab a Bible and turn to Exodus chapter 14. And as you're turning to the book of Exodus, let me just say that word Exodus simply means to depart, or to exit. And that's exactly, as we pick up the story, exactly what the Israelites were doing. They have been slaves in Egypt for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. And they cry out to God. They cry out to God for their freedom. And God finally sends a deliverer to deliver them. And the deliverer's name, of course, was Moses. Yeah, some of you know the story. Moses. God sends Moses to them. And when we pick up the story in Exodus chapter 14, just so you know, Pharaoh, who was the ruler, the king over Egypt, has finally agreed to let go of these Israelite slaves. There's close to probably 2 million of them. And he finally agrees to let them go after a series of what I call Scud missiles hit him. They are also called plagues in the Bible. But plague after plague after plague. And finally, Pharaoh goes, okay, go. Israelites, get out of here. And the Israelites begin to leave. And just as they're leaving, Pharaoh changes his mind and sends his army, his chariots out to massacre, to destroy the Israelites. And that's where we are going to pick up the story together. So let's go to Exodus 14, verse 5. When word reached the king of Egypt that the Israelites had fled, Pharaoh and his officials changed their minds. What have we done letting all those Israelite slaves get away, they asked. So Pharaoh harnessed his chariot and called up his troops. He took with him 600 of Egypt's best chariots, along with the rest of the chariots of Egypt, each with its own commander. Verse 10, as Pharaoh approached, the people of Israel looked up and panicked when they saw the Egyptians overtaking them. They cried out to the Lord, and they said to Moses, here we go, gang, why did you bring us out here to die in the wilderness? Weren't there enough graves for us in Egypt? What have you done to us? Well, look at this. Why did you make us leave Egypt? I labeled that whole passage there, let the whining begin. Because here it is, full force coming at us, you know. I mean, it's clear here. They're already getting into the grumbling business. They're already jumping on the belly-aching bandwagon. But I want to give them a pass on this, and here's why. Think about their circumstances. Put yourself in their Birkenstocks right now. Put yourself in their sandals right now. They've been freed from slavery. They're moving to their promised land, and all of a sudden, this Philistine or this Egyptian army, well-trained, well-equipped, this murderous machine is coming at them. And they're helpless. They had no weapons at all. And all of a sudden, they find themselves retreating. And all of a sudden, they find themselves right here. Their back is against a wall of water. It was called the Red Sea. And some of you know what happens. Again, what happens in the next verse and what we see later that happens, and you know the story, many of you do, is that God did a miracle. As they find themselves, their backs against the Red Sea, what does God do to the Red Sea? He parts it. Yeah, some of you know the story. He parts the Red Sea, and all of a sudden you got these big walls of water, and God's people, they exit. They go through the Red Sea on dry ground, and then as the Egyptians with murder on their mind, it was going to be a massacre of epic proportions. As the Egyptian army pursues them, what happens to the wall of water? It goes, and just like that, The Egyptian army is doing the dead man's float. And just like that, it's miracle number one from God. I just try to picture the whole thing. I know you've probably seen it if you ever watched the Ten Commandments, on TV. But all of a sudden, they're delivered. And it's party time now. God's delivered his people. They're not going to face annihilation. In chapter 15 of the book of Exodus, the entire chapter, it's party time. They have this just time of rejoicing and celebrating, like what we're going to do when the Vikings win the Super Bowl next year. Yeah. And that's how they're partying right now. And the question is, how long will this party of praise last? I mean, it's so crazy that verse 20, Exodus 15, verse 20, tells us that even this woman named Miriam, she grabs tambourine. They start passing out tambourines. And before you know it, everybody's dancing. All of Israel, just try to picture 2 million people dancing and grooving to the beat, proving that they were not Baptists or they were not Lutherans, because they're dancing. They're dancing. And the question is, how long will this gathering of gratitude last? And the answer is, not very long. 3 days. Let's get back to our story. 3 days later. Verse 22, chapter 15. Then Moses led the people of Israel away from the Red Sea, and they moved into the desert of Shur. They traveled in this desert for 3 days without finding any water. When they came to the oasis of Marah, the water was too bitter to drink. So they called the place Marah, which means bitter. That makes sense. Yeah. Then the people complained and turned against Moses. Here we go again. What are we going to drink? They demanded. All right, try to picture this now. All right? They're complaining and groaning and whining about wanting their freedom. So God does a miracle, and they've got their freedom now. And now, what do they want? Well, now they're crying out and they're grumbling about water. And the very next verse, we're not going to look at this, but the very next verse, God does another miracle. God has Moses pick up a stick. Remember the story? And Moses hurls the stick into the water that was affected, and all of a sudden, this water becomes purified. It becomes clean. All of a sudden now, they've got good drinking water. So now they've got freedom, right? Woo! And now they've got filtered water, right? And now they're going to be happy campers, right? I mean, certainly now they're going to be grateful people, right? The sun's shining. The birds are singing. The flowers are blooming. The fish are jumping. The kids are playing all by themselves at the playground. I mean, this is a good day, right? This is a really good day. And you think now they're going to be happy, right? Well, they are until we get to verse 1 of chapter 16. Chapter 16, verse 1. Then the whole community of Israel set out from Elim and journeyed into the wilderness of Sin between Elim and Mount Sinai. They arrived there on the 15th day of the second month, 1 month after leaving the land of Egypt. There too, listen, the whole community of Israel complained about Moses and Aaron. If only the Lord had killed us back in Egypt, they moaned. There, we sat around, pots filled with meat, and ate all the bread we wanted. But now, you have brought us into this wilderness to starve us all to death. Wow. It's getting worse, isn't it? They whined about freedom, they got freedom. They whined about water, they got filtered water. And now what are they whining about? Well, they want meat and they want bread. And the very next verse, again, we see God do another miracle. We're not going to look at it together. Some of you know exactly what happens. That God does another miracle. God decides to rain down food from heaven to his people. They're in the middle of nowhere. They're in the middle of a desert in the wilderness, and God is going to miraculously provide food. Every evening, get this, every evening God is going to drop chicken wings down to these people. It was also called quail, by the way. And every morning when they wake up, old-fashioned donuts are just sitting there. It was also called manna, by the way. This is just my interpretation of the story. I hope it's okay with you. Yeah, so every day, Every day. They don't have to cook it. They don't have to catch it. They don't have to clean it. Every day, food arrives in a miraculous way for these people. My friends, just try to picture the scene. 2 million of them. 2 million of these people receiving food, receiving water, receiving freedom. And certainly now, they're going to be grateful people, right? What do you think? Nah, they're just like us. In fact, I want to jump from this book, which is Exodus. I want to take us to another book in the Bible that describes this journey as well. Same journey, same thing here, but I want to jump over to Numbers chapter 11. And here's what happened. This is Numbers chapter 11. There's a book in the Bible called Numbers. Chapter 11, verse 4. It says, some troublemakers among them wanted what? Say this word. Better. They got the wings, and they got the old-fashioned donuts, but they want better food. And soon, all, note that word, by the way, all the Israelites began complaining. They said, we want meat. We remember the fish we ate for free in Egypt. We also had cucumbers, melons, leeks, onions, garlic, Starbucks coffee. But now we have lost our appetite. Now we never see anything but this manna. Wow. This is really getting serious, isn't it? And I shared this passage from the book of Numbers with you because I think it illustrates with crystal clarity what complaining does to you and what complaining does to me and why we need to take it seriously. Why we're not going to put it in the category of baseball, apple pie, and Chevrolet. No, it belongs in a completely different category. And what I want to share with you just very quickly is I want to share with you what complaining, what whining, what grumbling does. Why we have to take this seriously. Why we need to wave the white flag today and say, I quit to it. So there's 3 things. If you're a note taker, this would be a great time to write these down. Number 1, just this is so plain here in the story, is that complaining is contagious. Right? It doesn't take long. All you see here, you just realize that this little group of people, we just read the verse. I'll read it again for you. It's Numbers 11:4 says, soon there's this little group of riffraff complaining about we want better food, right? And then the Bible says, and you can look there, soon all the Israelites began complaining. Wow. You want to talk about contagious? There it is, right there. You got this little band of people complaining, and soon, the Bible says, all the Israelites, think about this, all 2 million of them jumped on the belly-aching bandwagon. And I don't know if you've ever seen it. I've seen this so many times. It just takes a small group of people. It sometimes just takes one person to affect everyone else in the whole complaining, grumbling, moaning, whining category. Seriously, I've seen this in families where one person starts complaining over and over and over again. And before you know it, that whole family is infected. They all become a bunch of whiners. I've seen it in groups of friends where all of a sudden this one new friend, or maybe one friend becomes this negative, pessimistic person who just whines and whines and whines. And before you know it, that whole group of friends is infected, and they all become grumblers and complainers. I've seen it in churches. I've seen it in churches so many times where a small group of people who bellyache, it's all they do. They complain about this, and they complain about that, and they complain about this over here. They complain, and before you know it, the whole church is infected with this disease of complaining and whining. I hate to say this, but just sitting next to a negative Nancy or just sitting next to a grumbling Gary can affect you. Anybody want to get up and change seats at any of our campuses right now? I'm being honest, friends. We need to talk about this because it is so clear that complaining is contagious. It gets so bad. It gets so bad amongst the Israelites that we read this verse in Exodus 18. It says, the next day, what did Moses do? He took his seat, I'm going to pretend like I'm Moses here, to hear the people's disputes against each other. They waited before him, look at this, from morning till evening. Can you picture that? Just picture Moses sitting in his seat. And from sun up to sundown, there's a line a mile long of people waiting, not to register their chariot at the DMV, but what? To register complaints against their peers. Just picture this mile-long line of people walking up and this whining and complaining against their fellow Jew. Friends, this is why we've got to talk about this. This is why we've got to say before we leave our campuses today, I quit. I quit that. All right, that's not it though. There's more. Secondly, here's the second thing. While we're talking about this, first of all, it's contagious. And secondly, whining warps reality. It distorts our perspective. And you know this if you've ever hung around a whiner. They don't see anything. They don't see reality. All they see is just this little thing that's not going well. They don't see all the good things. All they see is this tiny little sliver of the pie that's not going well in their lives. And we saw that in Numbers 11:5. It says, we remembered the fish we ate for what? Free. Free? They were slaves. If you go back and read the Exodus story, before they were freed, they were beaten mercilessly. They had these taskmasters that were constantly whipping them and beating them. There was nothing free about anything that they had. In fact, I just want to go back also very quickly to Exodus 16:3, where they say, we sat around pots filled with meat, eating all we wanted. Come on. They didn't sit around. They were slaves. But you see how this whole thing, how whining distorts reality? And it does it for me. And I know it does it for you. Because all we see, there's so many good things going on all around us. But all we do is we focus on the negative. Friends, there's always going to be negative things. And if that's all you focus on, then you become infected with this disease that they had. And that's why, because grumbling distorts perspective and outlook. That's why we need to take this so seriously, because it infects us. You do know this, don't you? If you live a life of complaining and whining, you're going to end up all alone. Because nobody wants to be around a person who does nothing but complain. And I'll tell you too, the other thing it does to us is it sucks the joy right out of our lives. You will never wake up a happy camper. It doesn't matter what God does. It doesn't matter how many miracles God's doing in your life. You won't see them. And the other thing it does, and we're going to talk about this now, I hate to even bring this up, but it really affects our relationship with God. And this is probably the most serious thing that we've got to talk about right now. And the way I've worded it for you here is that grumbling drives a wedge between myself and God. And I know that sounds like really in your face, but I just need to say this. Every time I complain, every time you complain, it's like an insult to God. Every time we whine and bicker and moan and groan, you know what we're saying every time we do that? We're basically saying this: God, you're doing a crappy job of running the universe. And friends, that's a pretty serious thing. And yeah, I wish I could sugarcoat it. I wish I could say that in a politically correct way, but I just got to speak the truth today. This drives a wedge between myself and God. Every time I complain, it's a slap in God's face. It's a slur before God. And that's why we've got to talk about this today. I want to go back to our story because many of you know this, that because the Israelites complain, whine, bellyache, they got shut out of what? Of the promised land. God got so upset with them that God withheld this thing that they wanted so badly, which was called the promised land. Instead of going into the promised land because of their complaining, what did God do? He had them do laps around the desert. Lap after lap after lap after lap. 40 years of doing laps, all because of their whining and they're complaining. And Moses sums it up for us in another book in the Old Testament, the book of Deuteronomy. Here's what he says. He said, when the Lord heard your complaining, what did he do? He became very angry. So he solemnly swore, look at this, not one of you from this wicked generation will live to see the good land that I swore to give your ancestors. They got shut out. They ended up in a desert for 40 years. Why? Because they were whiners. And I started thinking about this. Look up here. I wonder if some of us are stuck right now in a desert somewhere because of our whining and complaining. I wonder if we're in a desert of loneliness. Why? Because nobody wants to be around us anymore, because we're so negative. We're so pessimistic. I wonder if we're in a desert of loneliness because of that. I wonder if we're in a desert of conflict because of that. Why? It's a lot easier to whine about something than to lean in and try to solve whatever the problem is. And I wonder if some of us feel distance from God for the same exact reason. Because God is upset with us, because all we do is insult him with our whining. You want a sobering verse? If what I just said is not sobering enough, you want a sobering verse from the New Testament? Here's what Paul says. This is in 1 Corinthians. Paul writes, and don't grumble, as some of them did. He's talking about 1,400 years ago when he writes this. He's talking about the Exodus story. Don't grumble as some of them did, and then were destroyed by the angel of death. Oh, these things happened to them as examples for us. They were written down to warn us. And I don't know about you, but as I read that verse, don't grumble as some of them did, and then were destroyed by the angel of death. I'm so glad, aren't you, that God doesn't send his angel of death to wipe us out when we whine. Because I would not be here right now. And none of us would be alive right now. And friends, this is why we have to, before we leave our campuses today, we got to put our hand up and say, I'm going to go in a different direction. I'm not going to be part of this culture of complaint any longer. I'm going to go countercultural. I'm going to be that person. I'm going to be that person who lives a different kind of life. Not a life of grumbling, but a life of gratitude. And maybe you're thinking right now, okay, Pastor Phil, I want that. I want to be that person. How do I break free of this culture of complaint? How do I stop? How do I quit complaining? And you're not going to like my answer, because my answer is, I don't know. I really don't know. But what I do know is you're a smart person. What I do know is if you're a follower of Jesus, you've got God's Spirit within you, and you can do all things through Christ. I know that. The other thing I know is this, that nothing is going to change in my life or your life until we take responsibility for our lives. Nothing is going to change until I take responsibility for my whining and my grumbling and my complaining. Do you know that complaining is a choice? Do you know that? It is. It's a choice. Every time I complain, it's because I made the choice to complain. You know what that means? That means I can make a choice to do the opposite. I can choose, just like I can choose to complain, I can choose to be grateful. Because that is always my choice. And the other thing I know, besides the fact that we've got to take responsibility for our lives and for our grumbling, is this, that nothing's going to change in my life or your life until we start to notice the things that everybody else takes for granted. Nothing's going to change. As long as we're allowing complaining and whining to distort our perspective, nothing is going to change until we start to notice what everybody else on the planet is taking for granted. Because we're going to spend the rest of our lives either taking things for granted or taking things with gratitude. And that choice is on me, and it's on you. So I want us to practice. All right? I want us to practice for just a moment noticing what most people take for granted. So I would really encourage you to participate with me, all right? This is not going to be weird, I promise. So just go ahead and take your hand and put it out like this. Everybody, don't complain, just do it. All right. Now, just look at your hand right now, all right? Now I want you just to follow my command here. Wiggle your fingers. Go ahead, wiggle your fingers. Can you believe that? Can you believe that your brain said wiggle, finger, and your fingers just wiggled? That's a miracle. Seriously, how many, you can stop doing that. Have you ever thought about that? Your brain said wiggle fingers and your fingers just wiggled. We don't know why. They just wiggled. Friends, that is a miracle from God. That we've got to just notice these little kind of things like that. All right, now I want you to take your thumb and look at your thumbprint for just a moment. All right? Find the little lines. Just try to find the little lines, you know. I got mine here. Do you know that nobody else on the entire planet has a thumbprint just like yours? There's not one single person on the planet. Do you know there are 7.4 billion people in the world right now, and not one of them shares your fingerprint with you? That is a miracle. God made you, uniquely you. And after God made you, God broke the mold and threw it away. There will never be another person ever alive who has your thumbprint. Wow. That's a miracle. That's a miracle. And now what I want you to do is take your right hand and find your pulse on your left wrist. I'm afraid that some of you won't be able to find one because I'm not sure you're alive right now. I hope you are. Just find your pulse. In the next 60 seconds, if you're like normal person, your heart is going to beat about 80 times. By the end of the day today, your heart will have beat 115,200 times. And every single beat is a reminder to you and a reminder to me that we matter to God. That God made us and God put us here on this planet for a reason. Every single beat is a reminder that life itself is a gift. That this day is a gift. That the air I'm breathing right now is a gift. And I don't know if you know, I've been around a long time. In fact, I calculated this. This took me a long time. My heart has beat over 2.5 billion times already in my lifetime. 2.5 billion times. And whether my heart beats another day or whether my heart beats another decade, I want, from this day forward, I want to get out of the complaining business. I want to get off of the belly aching bandwagon from this day forward. And I know that you want to do the same. I want to wake up in the morning and instead of whining, I want to shine for God. I want to be one of those persons that doesn't take things for granted, but takes things with gratitude. And I know you want to do the same. And it all starts with us taking responsibility for our lives. And it all starts with us noticing what everybody else is taking for granted. So what we're going to do right now, before we go off and enjoy our Mother's Day, we're going to take like 60 seconds or 90 seconds. And all I want you to do is grab a pencil or a piece of paper, a pencil or a pen, and grab whatever you got on the way in here. Don't worry, no one's going to collect these. All I want you to do in 90 seconds is just to start listing, find some white space, and just start listing the things that you take for granted, that you need to start noticing and taking with gratitude. And if you're a kid or a teenager here, or a young adult, you might want to just, number one, mama, all right? Because don't we take our mothers for granted way too often? Maybe that's number one on your list. And just start listing. You've got 60 seconds. Just start listing as many things as you can. Things that you've taken for granted that you want to start taking with gratitude.